Hi everyone, welcome to a new Rhino User Webinar. This is Pedro, and today Simon Kallioinen will demonstrate the process of creating a music video for his song Nutritious Soil. The video was made using Grasshopper and is entirely based on line graphics. The webinar will provide an overview of the Grasshopper script, as well as delve into techniques relevant to creating animations in Grasshopper, such as triggering events from timecode, creating smooth transitions, and incorporating data from external formats. Simon is an architect and he focuses on analysis tools, computational design, and carbon footprint calculations. He is also a passionate musician under the alias of Simon Aulis. As you probably know, there will be a Q&A session after the presentation, and you will be able to ask your questions to Simon. Simon, please feel free to start whenever you want.
Yes, thank you, Pedro. I will share my screen then, and I will start immediately.
Okay.
So let's see. This is where I start. Okay, yeah, you heard about this already. So I'm an architect at FOIAB in Stockholm, Sweden, and I work mainly with the analysis tools and a lot of carbon footprint calculations. And yeah, I am crazy about music, as Pedro said, and of course about Grasshopper. It's two of my great passions in life that I have finally been able to join together in one project. This is some really short examples of what I do in my professional work. A lot of carbon footprint. I have developed a tool, we call it Leaf Cutter Ant. It's a Grasshopper plugin for the Swedish market, and I use that to compare different scenarios and things to reduce the carbon footprint of buildings. This is another example of a custom analysis tool that we developed for getting a sort of a tool to calculate the potential of trees in cities. How, if we could get more trees in the city of Malmö, in this case. And this is another project we did for a campus, for a university, where we analyzed the bookings that they had made for all the rooms, and from that we could propose how much spaces they actually needed, because they wanted lots and lots of new spaces for the new campus, and we said basically you need 50% of that, but then that was way too radical, so they threw us out and got another architect instead. But it was based on, I mean, how much they actually needed, so we were, but it was too radical. Okay, anyway, I always wanted to make a music video using Grasshopper for some song that I have written some time, but I didn't have any ideas. I had no clue what to do whatsoever, actually. But I was thinking about this off and on for many years. But it was completely black, actually. And then after many years, I just bumped into this funny little device called the Kinect. We used it for a project at work. And it's a cheap 3D scanner with really low precision, but it can scan both point clouds and skeleton tracking or motion capture, or what you want to call it, at 30 hertz. It was developed by Microsoft, and it's not that new any longer. It's like 10 years old, actually, and it's really cheap. You can buy it for, I think, less than 200 euros probably. And you can do a lot of fun things with it, even though it's very limited in some ways also. So basically, I started it out and I get the skeleton real time in Grasshopper, and then that was it. Then I knew this was the idea for the video. This was the technique to make it organic and not so static and boring, to make the 3D graphics come alive. So the actual script is very little coding. It's like 99% standard or plugin components, and the data trees are quite simple, actually, compared to what I do professionally. Mostly flat lists, the script consists of a lot of small parts that are all connected to the timecode. So they are not so much interconnected. It's more like small worlds, but they are all connected to the timecode, which runs everything like a conductor conducts an orchestra. So that is what creates the timing, of course. And to me, this is probably the most fun project I ever did in Grasshopper, even though I really love working in Grasshopper and I do it a lot. But this was like, it was a completely new level. It was just so driven from creativity and passion and everything. So it was really, really fun. So some techniques that I have used. Skeleton tracking, as I mentioned. I used another software to record the skeleton tracking. It's called Brekelsoft, and with the help of that, I could use the 30 hertz skeleton tracking, which I needed. If you do it real time in Grasshopper, you get a much worse update frequency. So it becomes, doesn't look that good. And of course, I have to trigger a lot of events here, trigger them to the music. I mean, everything is about timing in this video. So what I use is MIDI data. That's a musical data format, and I will just talk a little bit about it later so that you know what it is about. But basically, the timecode and the MIDI data runs most of it. And there is a lot of work with the camera movement based on interpolating camera locations and things. And this turned out to be it was quite a lot of work, actually. It was not so easy because to get really smooth and nice camera transitions, it turned out to be quite one of the tricky parts, actually. I will talk a little bit about it later. But first, I just want to, I hope you have seen it already because you will hear the sound will be really shitty now when it's streamed through my computer. But I will just show a short snippet of the video. Well, I can't do it like that. Okay. You can look at the strings here, for example, how they move. And every string corresponds exactly to the note that I am playing.
What to leave behind? I thought the choice.
Also, the hammers on the piano are moving, but it's hard to see. And here you got more strings moving on the bass.
And a pile of bones under the tombstone.
And here you can see, of course, the guitar strings as well. It's just a couple of seconds more, and then I will talk about what is happening here. Okay, so a bit more about the skeleton tracking. So I had to fake play these instruments, sort of air instruments, and the Kinect, of course, if you hide your limbs from it, it won't see them. So I had to have like basically playing in the air. You will see a photo soon how it actually looked when I did this. And it's also you got a pretty limited range on how to move, and you can definitely not spin around yourself and things like that. Then it will lose the skeleton tracking. It will take a couple of seconds to find it again and things. And I had to do it all in one take because it turned out to be like completely impossible to do some kind of smooth transitions between different takes. So yeah, it had to be one take, and it's 7 minutes almost. So, and I'm not a performance artist, so it was not that easy. Also, it was actually a bit glitchy to record. I mean, probably 80% of all the recordings had some sort of glitch where it didn't record for half a second or something. So I just had to redo it. Probably I did 80 or 90 takes or something before I had the final one. And yeah, as I said, I used Brekelsoft Body to record the data. And you can use that. It has a couple of different softwares, and it can use a different some different cameras, not only the Kinect. It records 24 nodes for the body. I didn't use every single one of them, but most of them. And it's a cool thing about working with this kind of data is that it's so lightweight. Even though it's 7 minutes of recording, it was only 35 megabytes. So it's super light. And I mean, doing something with point clouds for 7 minutes would probably be almost impossible with a normal computer. Probably start by having to buy some really massive computer to even pull it off. Okay, so this is how it looked when I recorded everything. You can see there's a fake piano here. It's just a small board with I painted some keys on it. And this is the fake contrabass. It's a metal rod. And this is where I play the drums. And yeah, I had some tapes you can't move too close to the Kinect and you can't move too far from it and everything. And yeah, it was chaos in the living room because we were refurbishing, but it was kind of perfect. So nothing to bump into. Okay, so when you work with animations, one thing that I sort of would say is probably something you have to do is to base everything from sort of like you would normally do in a Grasshopper script, that everything is based from an initial position, so that you can at any time you can go to any frame. I tried, I don't know, maybe because reality works more like incremental from one movement to the next. So I did some experiments working like that, basically to have a state and then you move something to the next state. But that becomes impossible, and it's also impossible because that means you would have to render everything perfectly, and if anything crashes, you would have to start all over again and things like that probably. So it would be impossible. I don't know if this is clear. You can actually ask questions if you don't understand my explanations here, but I would say definitely have some sort of discrete time where you can go to a specific time code. You could basically render it from the backwards. It wouldn't matter because every single frame is calculated from the initial state of the script. Of course, it's very important to calculate as little as possible when you do like this. This was, I think, 25,000 frames or something, because I had to render it in 60 frames per second because this kind of graphics didn't look good in lower because it's vector graphics. I really had to have a high frame rate. So, of course, in this case, I tried to do all the really, really heavy calculations once in the beginning when I started the script. And then it could sort of, do the smaller incremental changes for each frame. Of course, this depends on what you are doing with your script, but maybe you could even run basically all the calculations from the beginning. Maybe it would take many hours, and then you could just sort of pick the right frame or something like that. Depends on what you're doing, of course. But it took maybe, I mean, in the end, when I got all these heavy graphics that are happening, we will see a bit of them later. It was a couple of seconds to render each frame. So even though it's not actually rendering graphics, it's just calculating the script. You can see that the graphics are just the shaded view mode in Grasshopper with some line thicknesses. Okay, so working with timecode. I mean, this is, if you have done animations, you have done this, but some things that I have learned from this project. Domains is really your friend here. So in the screenshot here, you can see a really short example, small example here where you have some sort of domain here from 1,000 to 6,000. So this could be milliseconds. I have used milliseconds for the timecode because that's also what the MIDI format uses. So you can calculate pretty easily how long each frame would be in milliseconds, and then you can multiply that with the number of the frame you are at the instant, and then you will get the current time code. And if that is within the domain, then you want something to happen. And then the remapping, to remap a domain, is a really nice way of doing this. So basically, if you have this domain here from 1,000 to 6,000, at 6,000, this value will start to become a little bit more than 0 because it will be remapped to a value between 0 and 1. So as you move through this domain, you will get closer to 1. And when you're above, if you use the C output here, the clipped output, then you will get the value that is never bigger than or smaller than, never smaller than 0, never bigger than 1. So then you get this value, and then you can use the graph mapper to, for example, if you don't want the movement to be linear, you can use it this way. So this is a really easy way of doing controlling your. It can be something that grows, something that moves along a curve, for example. This could then be used as the parameter of the curve with the t value to move something along a curve. So this is a really nice way of doing it. You could, of course, use the opposite domain here from 1 to 0 instead, and then it would move. You will see the symbols that I have animated are done like that. So then you can get something that starts with a heavy movement, and then the movement gets smaller and smaller, less and less. So this is a really nice, and I use this basically everywhere in this script. And I did save some of these things into clusters, but basically this is the concept of most of the calculations actually, so it's not that complicated. Okay, so just a few words about MIDI data. It's a really old digital communication protocol from 1981, and instead of sending sounds, it sends only the data, like which note did you hit, how hard did you hit it. That's called the velocity. So you have note on messages, note off messages when you release the note, and some things like that, also some other data. And it was developed for synthesis to be able to communicate with between different synthesizers. So you could use one keyboard and plug it into a couple of different synthesizers, for example. And now it's used it's used in all kind of digital instruments like digital drums, and if you got electrical wind instrument, all these kind of things. So my studio is a lot of digital instruments. I got this kind of drums, and if you have listened to the song, you could hear some saxophones. Actually, it's not a real saxophone. It's actually an amazing physical model of a saxophone that I play with a keyboard and a breath controller. A breath controller is a device that I blow into, and it translates the breath into this kind of data, intensity data, you could call it, that you can map then to the volume of the saxophone. So it sounds, it's not only the volume, it's actually the whole intensity of the instrument. Yeah, and for this video, it was really great that I had all this data in digital format, because I could actually translate and use it in Grasshopper, which to me is like, I think the interesting thing here. I mean, it's possible that people wouldn't see the difference between something that was like not actually the right notes, but since I had all this data, everything you see in the video is actually corresponding to exactly what is happening in the actual song. And I mean, it's possible that if I would hit the wrong cymbals, no one would notice, or if the strings would move on the piano a bit more random, maybe you wouldn't even see it. But I don't know. For me, I just think it's very nice to know that it's like perfect correspondence to the music. The vocals and the guitar, though, they were audio recordings, so no MIDI data there, only actual audio, actual sound. So I created MIDI data afterwards just to use. So the vocals, I use MIDI data to change the words of the lyrics so that the right word is coming up on this person. And for the guitar, yeah, you could see the strings move, so I had to make some fake MIDI data for the guitar. So that is not maybe as well corresponding to the song as the other instruments. So I had to. This was like probably the worst part of it from a workflow point of view. I had to convert the MIDI data into TXT files with another software. But you know how it is when you do this project. I thought I was finished with the song, so I thought, okay, I'll only do this once. So I'll only convert this MIDI data once to TXT with this. It was a little bit of work, but not much. Anvil Studio was the software I used. But then, of course, I made a lot of changes and changes again and changes again. So I did it many, many times in the end. So of course, if I would do this more, I would probably try to program a component that would translate the MIDI data so that you could open the MIDI file directly in Grasshopper and use it. But now I had to do this little bit cumbersome process. Okay, so all the moving objects, drums, strings, cymbals, and everything, they correspond to a specific note number in this MIDI data. So it's basically each cymbal, for example, consists of a small filter that only looks at this certain note that is connected to this cymbal and reacts when something happens on that note. And so by using this remapping concept that I showed you earlier, I look basically when was the last event on this cymbal. And if it was just 1 millisecond ago, then the amplitude of the movement would be almost 1. And then as it decays further and further away, I mean, if it was a couple of seconds ago, then this value will have gone down to 0. Basically the way that I showed you. I also have the Grasshopper script open in the background, and I can show you this later on if you're interested. And the velocity of the note that is in MIDI, it's from 0 to 127. So that is also converted to remapped, you could say, to from 0 to 1. So I can multiply that. So that basically means that if I actually hit the note really hard in the song, that will create more movement on the string or on the cymbal. And if it's a very soft hit, it will only be a tiny movement. And all the movements basically on the strings and on the cymbals, that just some crazy sign functions that has nothing to do with reality or real physics or something. I just tried it out until it looks cool. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything else than pure aesthetics of the video. Okay, so rendering long animations in Grasshopper, that has some special problems. I used the built-in slider animation feature. You know, you right-click on the slider and you click on the animate thing and you save the screen capture. It allows maximum of 10,000 or 9,999 frames. So you could never do this long video without having to restart it a couple of times, doing it, I mean, not restarting, but like doing it in multiple parts. And then, of course, it crashed, which always happens when you have complex scripts like this. There was absolutely no logic behind the crashes. It could happen anytime. I was rendering during the nights on a much better computer than my own. And especially in the end, when it was more complex, it started crashing really, really, really often. So the final video consists of, I don't know, 20 to 30 parts or something. So sometime it just had rendered a couple of 100 frames and I had to calculate which frame it crashed on and start from there and do it again. And so that was not the most fun part. Also, that was basically the only way of seeing what I was actually doing with the music was to render it and bring it into software where I could put the music and the video together with the correct synchronization so that I could actually see how well it worked. Of course, I didn't do like the full resolution and things, and I did it with much lower frame rate in the beginning, but it was still like I had to render it a couple of times and change things and render it again and change things and so on. Of course, it would have been great to just click on some real-time button in Grasshopper and the music would start and everything would move synchronized, but that couldn't be done because it was first tool was way too heavy. Took a couple of seconds per frame in the end, and yeah, there, as you know, there. I mean, maybe you could develop that kind of plugin for Grasshopper, but it still wouldn't be real time. Maybe you could at least use something that would start the music at a certain time or something, but I didn't bother about that. Okay, so the camera movement is a bit tricky, actually. I saved the camera locations as named views, and I brought that data into Grasshopper. But the tricky thing here was that, yeah, I interpolated between these camera positions to get sort of a smooth movement. If you would use a polyline between these different camera points, it would look really, really awful. Unless you would like that robotic movement, but usually we don't like that for cameras. So, but the tricky thing was actually the camera speed, because sometimes two camera positions were really close to each other, so it should move really slow, and sometimes they were really far, so it should move really, really quickly between them. And if you would just let it change, like the polyline you can see here with kinks, and I mean, then you could see this speed change, and it didn't look good at all. So I had to. This was something that I didn't figure out immediately how to do, but so basically I translated the speed into a two-dimensional graph, something similar that you can see here on the screen, this polyline, and then I basically could smooth the polyline. I don't remember exactly if I used an interpolating curve or if I filleted the corners or whatever I did, but I did something like that, and then I could read the distance here. So in this case, it would be the y coordinate that could be translated back into the t value of the curve. So how to move on the curve, like the distance from the start of the curve, basically. So so the time code would basically be projected here onto this smooth curve, and then you would see like, okay, what y value am I on here, and then that would be the movement. So that was a way. I mean, maybe if you would be a mathematician, would probably not do it this way, and they would probably say that I'm completely crazy doing it this way. But to me, not being a mathematician, this was. I mean, but I know Grasshopper very well, so then I could use all these graphical functions to solve this kind of mathematical problem. There is a sphere of stars appearing in the end of the video also. I found a rectangular map, so I had to remap it to the sphere. And a funny thing also about these things corresponding to reality or to the music is that it had different sizes of the stars in this file, depending on how much you can see the star from the Earth. So I could translate that into the size of the stars here. So it's, once again, I mean, if I would have randomized the size, maybe people wouldn't have noticed it, but it's kind of fun to know that actually the brightest stars on the sky, they are also the brightest stars here on this sphere of stars. So I thought that was a nice detail. Also the stars that, if you have seen the video, they come from, basically I shoot them out from the saxophone basically in the video. So I wanted it to correspond to the intensity of the saxophone playing. So if it plays very softly, there would only be a few stars coming out of the saxophone, and when it's an intense note, it would be more stars coming out. So after some failures, I realized that, I mean, I knew I had this breath controller data, which I then had to somehow translate into the amount of stars coming out of the saxophone. So I took this breath controller data and I created a surface from it, and then I populated it with a populate surface component. So it was quite easy when I found out the solution. And the amount of points, of course, is the amount of stars that I needed. And then so basically when time is moving along the x-axis here, I mean basically the x value of all the points here, the x coordinate of all the points here, that corresponds to a time code when this certain star here should appear. So in this way, I get more stars here when there's an intense note than here, for example, when it's a softer note. So once again, really fun to know that it corresponds. And maybe I think somehow you will see all these details. I mean, the human eye is usually good at noticing details. So I hope I didn't do it just for my own good, but actually that you can see it in the video. And I'm going to show you now the end of it in case you haven't seen it. So here you can see the stars coming out of the saxophone. And they are flying up to their position on the sphere. You can also see the trees and the flowers that are actually upside down copies of this body, the skeleton tracking body, so they are all dancing. Yeah, okay, let's see next. Sorry. So, yeah, if you have done computational design, you have probably worked a lot with random numbers. I had, but I had only basically used random numbers for static objects. So it was something new to work with these moving objects, these trees that I had here, because they start out really small with just one leaf or even without leaves and branches, and then they get more and more branches and more leaves as they grow. So I started out like I always do, just generating some random numbers, but it turned out that it was complicated to get all the numbers to have the same order in all these lists because they have random rotation, random placements, and everything. So everything, when they started growing and I needed more and more random numbers, I basically hadn't thought of that I needed to arrange this in a better way. So what I did was basically that I generated like the final version of the tree, the fully grown tree. I generated that kind of tree structure with all its random numbers, and then each and every single little leaf and branch has this growth value from 0 to 1. This is a bit of a simplification, but that's basically how it works. They also have their own random time domains. So all these different parts of the trees will start to grow at a certain time code and be fully grown at another part of the time code. And I think this is probably in general a good way of thinking about moving objects, or that when you need different amounts of random numbers at different times to basically do the full thing. I mean, if that is possible, maybe in some cases it's not even possible, but if it's possible, I think that's a good way of doing it, to first generate the final version of it basically with all the random numbers, and then you can have these growth factors of 0, so the leaf will be invisible basically, and then it will be, in this case they are growing, so they have a size of 0, and then the size becomes bigger and bigger. So yeah, I hope that you will see the complete video if you haven't already. I think you can find it if you search for Simon Aulis Music on YouTube. You can also find it through the links of this event here, the webinar event. And please ask questions. I have the script open so I can show you some small. I was thinking maybe to look at for example, how one of the symbols are moving, if that would be interesting, because basically all the movements are very similar. It's lines or circles, but they have the same kind of sinus function movements. But please ask me questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon.
Okay, we have a question from Todd.
Okay, Todd.
Hey, Simon and Pedro, thank you for hosting this. It's a really clever video and a very interesting approach, having visual representation of the music in both a very abstract but a very specific and accurate representation, influenced by early early computer graphics, early vector graphics, direct feeds that early pioneers like Ed Catmull and so forth were playing with, and even some of the most early videos that were leaning into early computer-generated imagery from the 80s and 70s and so forth?
Yeah.
Or did this just come about through process? It's a very, very striking, simple, beautiful way to represent everything. And then it also, leans into and quotes op art from the 60s. So I'm just really curious, outside of the science, the math, and the methodology, where your artistic inspiration came from.
Yeah, I think it's not like that I'm specifically into this kind of art or anything like that. I mean, of course, I've seen this kind of graphics. I mean, I think almost everyone has, and I have also tried this Vectrex video game that is based on vectors, and it's a cool sort of a little niche maybe in graphics nowadays. But I think for me, why I chose to use this kind of graphics was basically that, I mean, all these failed ideas that never even became ideas that I spoke about in the beginning, they were all like, I have to generate something inside of Grasshopper, and I know that it will be, computer graphics boxy, and it won't be organic. But then when I bumped into the Kinect, I realized this is the way to do it organic, because to me that's what I want it to be somehow. I mean, at least that was like when it struck me, it's like, okay, now this way it will start looking organic. And then when I tried it out, I felt that the graphics, it was so organic actually that it was enough. I didn't need anything more than vectors. Maybe it would be too much if I would use something else than vectors. So I, instead of trying to, I did some, maybe I should use some color or something, different colors or something. I mean, I love different colors. I always wear really crazy pink shirts and stuff like that. So my friends are like, oh, black and white video, that was not expected. But I mean, I felt somehow that it didn't need anything more. Instead, I just tried to develop this really organic sort of sensibility, or whatever to call it, so that it really feels that it's alive. I think that was what I wanted it. I wanted the computer graphics to come alive for real. And yeah, so that I mean, also I am totally crazy about plants and gardening and things like that. So the inspiration of this little island floating around in space with trees and seeds growing and flowers and things, of course, that's just like the first thing I ever think of. Like, say something beautiful, yeah, a flower and a tree. I mean, that's how I work. So that was kind of very easy for me to just pull that out of. I mean, that's how I work. So that was pretty obvious maybe to use that.
Sure. I mean, it's a beautiful balance of simplicity and complexity. And I think then it also lets, by not adding color and so forth, it allows you to really, I think, immerse yourself in the music and then let the imagery pay complement. And I think the simple yet complex layering of your instrumentation, it ties in so well with how botany communicates with each other, how mycelium and boreal forests are all communicating with each other. It's a really wonderful piece of work. So my compliments to you.
Thanks.
However you got there.
Wonderful to hear. really wonderful to hear. I actually I have a whole part in the script that I turned off because it became too messy, and that was actually roots growing first. So the seeds that are flying out of the saxophone first, the roots starts growing, and then they are growing above the ground. But it became too messy, and it was not necessary.
Right.
So
And
I
I think
removed that.
that's something always, as designers, artists, architects, industrial designers, we're always wrestling with, which is, when is the canvas dry? When do you walk away from it?
Yeah,
And at what
yeah.
point do you put too much paint on the canvas or too many notes in your song? So, yeah, I think it's a very eloquent balance of all of that.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah, I have one idea which is just, the rendering process was not that fun, as I told you, because there was crashed all the time. But there is actually one development which would be fun to do, and that is to do a stereoscopic version of it. It could even be this old 80s graphics, with one cyan and one red image on top of each other. So you would have to bring up your old, paper glasses from the 80s with the cyan and the magenta filter, cyan and red filter, and then you could see it stereoscopically. That's like, maybe I will do it sometime, but I'm also pretty much finished with this project. So, but it
Sure.
would be a fun thing to do.
I think it's a very interesting endeavor. As somebody who I've been very fortunate to have worked on a few other movies that were early adopters of 3D. I mean, I think when it's used in a very interesting way, whether it's extremely complex or something that's reduced down to vector line work, and this also reminds me, as somebody who's 56 years old, this reminds me as a kid of playing Asteroids or Amiga Race, some
Yeah,
very, very old games, which were, that before we had raster graphics,
yeah.
that was the approach. And so there's this real kind of nostalgic feel to it that takes me back to my childhood, which is a really wonderful way to kind of connect. And this may not have even you may not have even been aware of it in a conscious way, but I think in a very interesting subconscious way, that's how it's resonating with some of us.
Yeah, I have. It was not like a conscious choice to do it retro, but my music is pretty much influenced of the 70s and the 60s. So in that sense, it also makes sense from that point of view. I am trying to look into the chat and see if there is anything there.
Yeah, Aaron Porterfield has a couple of questions for
Yeah.
you. MIDI to text is wild. So what was the format again? And was the song composed in Ableton or something else?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, real time. A question about real time. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, okay, first of all, I record everything in Cubase. So I exported it as the tracks that I needed as MIDI files from Cubase, and then I took it into Anvil Studio. It's a very simple. Well, you probably can do lots of things with it, but it feels like an old software. But I brought the MIDI files into Anvil Studio, and then you could save it to TXT from that, and then it has translated because it's basically a hexadecimal code. So, but the hexadecimal code was converted into like words that I could understand, like note on, note off, and note numbers and things like that instead of hexadecimal code. So if you would like to do a component in Grasshopper, you would have to treat the hexadecimal code and understand which, combinations of hexadecimal code that means certain things. But I skipped all that, so I just took it into TXT that way. And then, of course, I just could read the TXT in Grasshopper. And then it's interesting about this using OSC and real time. I mean, actually, in theory, this script could be almost run. I mean, if you would have like a supercomputer, you could see it as something that could respond to real-time data in some ways. It would have to be a remake of it, but if you would have all this wonderful, I mean, I think probably the devices that I have used are not good enough for that, but maybe with some better skeleton tracking devices and with a keyboard plug into your computer and some components that could read the MIDI data in real time from your keyboard, from your piano or something, or drums or whatever. Maybe you could do something simple that would be a real-time, a real-time visuals to that. Of course, Grasshopper is not the best for real time, as you know, because it always wants to finish the complete calculation of the script. And there are other visual scripting softwares which are developed for real-time graphics or real-time visuals, but I don't know them very well. But there is, for example, VVVV, maybe you've heard about. And I think they were completely different. I don't think they finished the complete calculation before they start the next one. I'm not sure how it works, or you have some sort of limitations on the components you can place on your canvas or something like that. I actually don't know it that well.
Yeah, actually, the last webinar was about connecting Grasshopper and VVVV.
Oh, okay, interesting. I have to
yeah,
to see it.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting to see how Moritz has developed some components to integrate in his workflow both softwares.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Also, Aaron wants to know more about the format, about the
motion capture format. Yeah. So I used Brekelsoft. That was actually the biggest expense for this video. It's not that expensive, but still a couple of hundred euros. And so that's a completely different software. You set it up, you record with a Kinect, and then it can export to FBX or a lot of different formats. I used CSV for this just to make sure that I could read it in Grasshopper. And you can also have like relative coordinates of the different nodes so that they are relative to each other, but I just had absolute coordinates and I exported them in CSV. So, and then I created a small cluster to read this Brekelsoft data, because of course I had to figure out which node is which order are they saved in, and some small things like that. So I did some sort of cluster to read this CSV data and translate it into this line drawing man that you could see in the video. So basically, if you would like to do that, I mean, maybe it's an hour or two of work, but you could contact me and I could send that cluster. It's not something that I mean, I could definitely share it, but it's not something super complicated. So that's how that worked.
Great, thanks for your explanation. So, any other questions from the audience? Aaron, you wanna know something else? Okay. Okay, great.
Okay. Yeah, I hope then that my explanations were clear enough.
Sure.
Otherwise, just ask me.
Again, Simon, thank you very much for your time preparing the webinar, and well, looking forward to see another video, of course.
Yeah,
made with Grasshopper.
Yeah, maybe one more before I die.
Who knows?
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was fun.
Okay,
yeah, thank you, Pedro. And of course, you can listen to my music also in the YouTube channel. There are some other songs. There is actually another video, but that is made in a completely different way, no 3D graphics. So you can check it out.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and see you in the next one. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.